Hello and welcome. Today we are in conversation with Professor Akeel Bilgrami, a renowned philosopher, a professor at Columbia University, and someone who has extensively written about secularism, pluralism, and concepts like this. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you today. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
So, I would want to begin by asking you about your experience here in Bangalore. You're here as a part of the jury for the Infosys Prize. Could you tell us something about that, sir?
Yes, this is a prize that's given annually in 6 different areas of scholarship and intellectual work, and the humanities and social sciences is the area which I'm the chair of the jury, and I think it's very worthwhile, partly because somebody who wins the prize then has to spend a month of sabbatical lecturing in institutions, educational institutions in India, and I think that's a very good thing. It's so anything that promotes intellectual exchange and exchange of ideas is great, and I think it does its bit in doing that.
Okay. You have spoken about the concept of secularism in the West and perhaps the specificities of the Western secularism. So, could you in brief tell our audience about the exact historic and material conditions in which Western secularism arose in the 16th and 17th century?
Sure. You see, Western secularism arose because of certain consequences of Western or European nationalism. So it really arose in Europe, and it's a very fascinating thing because it arose in the context of old forms of legitimacy that state power had began to recede. For centuries, the state was justified, the exercise of power by a state was justified in theological terms. It was the divine right of the monarch, king or queen, who personified the state. Right? So this was a theological justification. But in the 17th century, with the rise of modern science, this justification began to lose its hold. And so a different form of justification was sought. And it was sought in political psychology rather than in theology. And this political psychology emerged with after the Westphalian peace, the Peace of Westphalia, after which power, which used to be quite scattered in its location, began to be more and more centralized. In fact, the first nationwide tax didn't happen till, I think, Oliver Cromwell imposed it in the middle of the 17th. So state power got more and more centralized, and a new form of entity emerged after the Peace of Westphalia, which was the nation. So nation and state emerged together, centralized power and nations emerged together, and they got so joined that they were actually expressed by a hyphen. It became the nation-state, nation-state. That became a sort of fused entity. And this political psychology justification for state power was to try and provide a justification for the nation, and because the nation was fused with the state, it was. So the reason why I call it political psychology is because the way it was done is that you created a feeling for the left-hand side of the hyphenated the nation. You created a feeling for the nation, and that justified the right-hand side of the state. And you know, after actually more than a century, this began to be called nationalism. The word nationalism came later, but this was the idea of nationalism is to create a feeling for the nation, and you legitimate the power that is, you know, the governing power. And this was very different from the divine rights of kings and so on. And what is remarkable about the history of Europe is that the way in which this feeling for the nation was created was really find an external enemy inside the territory.
The other.
To say the other, right? To say the nation is ours, not theirs, and the Jews were the standard target, but you know, the Irish in Britain, and then you know, the Protestants in Catholic countries, the Catholics in Protestant countries, and much later, when statistical and numerical forms of discourse came into the study of politics and society, this began to be called majoritarianism. You got notions like majority and minority, and so the external enemy within was the minority, and this kind of subjugating of the or despising of what's called majoritarianism. And since religion was very often the criterion for distinguishing majorities, it became to be called religious majoritarianism. And secularism emerged as a way of repairing the damage that was created, because when you had, say, religious majoritarianism, which was basically a form of generating a feeling for the nation by despising the minority, the other, when you had that, there were obviously minoritarian backlashes.
Right.
So this created the civil strife of early modern Europe. And secularism came to repair that damage, which was really the damage of nationalism, which created this kind of thing. And to repair that damage, it was thought it's best to usher all of religion, whether it's majority or minority religion, out of the orbit of the polity and the state institution.
The state is separated from religion.
Right. So the idea was that since all this whole problem had come because of religion and minority religions reacting, this is get religion out of it, and that was the origins of the doctrine of secularism. And of course in India, there was no such thing. I mean, in fact, the reason why Gandhi never spoke of secularism except until the 40s, So for all those decades when he was mobilizing for the freedom struggle, there was no talk of secularism.
Okay, sir. So if I can refer to your writings as well as speeches, you have pointed out you have quoted Nehru and referred to his seminal work, The Discovery of India. And you have pointed out that, there is some sort of an unself-conscious pluralism across the centuries in India.
Yeah.
In what way did it influence the freedom movement?
You see, what I mean by unself-conscious pluralism is that people just live side by side, communities of various kinds, and it's nationalism which undermines that. And in fact, it undermined it in Europe. Right? What I was describing, when you choose a particular group to despise, that's the beginning of destroying. You generate the other, but there is no other if you're just living side by side in an unself-conscious pluralism. And, people worshipped in the same dargahs, Hindus and Muslims, and, there was the whole tradition of Sufi bhakti, what's called the Shramanical tradition, and it was very much part of this unself-conscious pluralism. So that book of Nehru's, Discovery of India, is actually a book that's very close to Gandhi's thinking. And Nehru later there were differences between Nehru and Gandhi. Nehru, in fact, believed in a centralized power. He wanted central planning. He wanted to get rid of the princes, and he didn't.
More socialistic.
Socialistic was the central planning, but also he thought that if you had very decentralized provincial autonomy, the kind that Jinnah wanted,
Right.
You wouldn't be able to get rid of the princes. So his vision of a modern India was, you have to have a centralized power to get rid of the princes, to have central planning. So that's the socialist side. But just the modern side is it's futile to have princes, and and you won't be able to get rid of the princes if you didn't have a more central authority to do it, if you allowed that much regional autonomy that Jinnah was demanding. So these were the complex things that went into the failures of the national movement and generated the partition and so on. Yeah.
You have made this point across articles that according to you, the genesis of what we see as Hindutva nationalism today is perhaps not very old. You say that this might just be 4 or 5 decades old, something that started since emergency or so. Could you tell us why you feel that way? Because this year...
They're constantly saying this. Many people think that the roots of what we see now, this kind of Hindutva nationalism, started in the 20s, if not earlier,
right.
In the 1920s.
Right.
With the Congress Party had quite a strong Mahabite element. It started around then.
The RSS was founded in 1925.
Yeah, but the Mahabite element was, emerged before actually, and so people say, well, it had its roots there. But I believe that in these matters, you need a distinction between two notions, and it's not made by historians and social philosophers. And that's a distinction between roots and antecedents.
Okay.
And I think these were antecedents. And antecedents means they're probably unresolved questions and so on. But the roots didn't set in, I don't believe, until the 70s and 80s. And I think they're very interesting sources for why the roots set in.
In what way do you think the roots came in the 70s and 80s?
Well, look, there are lots of things I can say, but this is a short interview. So the two things which I think are very prominent and worth emphasizing is, first of all, you have to admit, that I think people don't like to admit it, but you have to admit that during the emergency, the Hindu right showed a lot of courage and resisted it. There's no doubt about that. In fact, they showed more courage than the center left. Center left just lay down like doormats and allowed Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay Gandhi to just stamp on the nation's liberties. And the Hindu right was part of a mobilization which showed some courage in resisting that. And as a result, they got a respectability in the electoral field which they had never had before. I mean, I think the Jansangh had 2 seats or something, So they got a certain respectability, a sort of moral high ground, which they never had. I mean, after all, the RSS had been banned. There was, there was the Gandhi assassination and all that. So all that stigma was redeemed to a considerable extent, and this obviously had an effect in the electoral field. So that's one. It suddenly. They had a sort of respectability in parliamentary politics, and you can tell from the way it picked up, So that's one. And the picking up was to a large extent done because I think of a second factor, which forms the roots, I think, and that is that there is no doubt that in the period after the emergencies, and in the 80s especially, in that whole period after, with Mandal and so on, there was a kind of democratization of politics, which was not there in the Nehruvian period. And democratization in the sense that castes and groups which had never had any power or began to get some.
Right.
And the sheer demography began to matter. That's what I mean by, and Mandal's
beginning of OBC politics.
Exactly. So Mandal, the Mandalization, as they say it, of politics was to calibrate the numbers of people in a caste with benefits and representations. When democratization took that form, it exposed just how deeply divided Hindu society was by caste. Mandal had that effect. It just showed to the whole country how deeply divided Hindu society was, something that had not been really done until this form of democratization. And I think the Hindu right felt very strongly that this had to be combated. They must combat that. And as a result, they began a very concerted effort, not just in the parliamentary field, but in the cultural field, to say, no, we are a unified religion, that we were not divided in this way. And in order to do that, you do the standard ploy. You did the European thing. You found an external enemy within, which was the Muslim, and you despised it, subjugated it, and said, we all are one. So it was a way of unifying against the democratized dividing of that followed upon Mandal. And it was a very concerted, very, very determined, concerted effort on the political field, the cultural field, and we're seeing it now. Ram Mandir, all this came out of that.
Right. Sir, but
so those are the roots. You see, that you can call that the roots. I mean, that's serious. Generating a kind of. Whereas the earlier stuff, I'm saying, the Mahasabhas, they were antecedents. They're not roots. And of course, if they're antecedents, there will be questions that weren't resolved, but you don't call that the roots.
Okay. Sir, but I think there is another view that perhaps right from the early days of freedom movement, there were two major streams of politics. One was the one represented by Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, which was more inclusive, which emphasized on communal harmony, which got into the national mainstream. If we look at persons like Savarkar or the RSS, who did not really fight for freedom movement, but despite that, the ideology and the concept of a Hindu Rashtra or a concept of the other was perhaps there in the 20s as well. So,
well, but you see, all sorts of things were there. There was a left. There was the communists and the Congress Socialists actually within the. So there was the left. There was this what you're describing, the Hindu right. There was the Ambedkarite stuff. So there are different strands in any national movement. There will be different strands of political, ideological, social movements, right, and tendencies. But nobody can deny that the Gandhi-Nehru one was the dominant strand.
Absolutely.
And the others were relatively marginal. In fact, there's a very interesting thing. Who was Ranathive, the left?
He's CPI leader.
Yeah, the CPI leader actually said, it's a miracle that we communists weren't just swallowed up by the Gandhi-Nehru Congress. It's a miracle we survived with an identity of our left identity of our own. He said that. And it's just an admission that even though there were these different strands, there's no doubt that they were marginal compared to the trajectory that Gandhi and Nehru, and just the mobilizational success.
Right.
And that mobilizational success was depended a lot on popular religion that Gandhi was channeling.
But when we speak of leaders like Gandhiji or Nehru, or even certain leaders from the left wing who were uncompromising about the idea of inclusiveness, communal harmony, and so on, once that generation disappeared, perhaps by mid 60s or late 60s, do you feel that the sort of lack of commitment amongst the national leadership for values like secularism and democracy, that might have also undermined these ideas which these leaders stood for?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's when roots begin to flower, then it's not just restricted to the Hindu right. I mean, they set the agenda. They set the agenda for, and then even those who are who belong to a legacy of a secular legacy like Nehru's, or a pluralist legacy like Gandhi's. Don't forget that you mentioned Nehru, but Gandhi, I think Gandhi was deeply and strong, really very fiercely anti the Hindu right.
Yeah.
In fact, the Hindu right killed him.
Yeah.
And that's, they saw him as a threat because he was actually had a different vision of Hinduism.
Right.
Whereas Nehru's overall picture was you just lay stress on class and this will all go away, which is actually quite didn't happen at all. And but I think Gandhi had a much more realistic sense of how Hinduism itself had a different tradition, and one should not make it into this Brahminical tradition.
Right. Sir, but coming to the present India of 2026, as an academic, how do you look at some changes in the academic sphere? For instance, we have had some textbook revisions. The NCERT textbooks have undergone some changes nowadays. For instance, we have the emphasis on Mughals has come down. Perhaps some parts of history which are uncomfortable to the ruling regime, such as the Babri Masjid demolition.
Sure.
Of 92, or let's say the post Godhra riots, the mentions are much faded, and perhaps the mentions are not even there.
Absolutely, this is just.
How do you look at that?
It's a brazen form of undermining academic freedom. It also happened in Pakistan. Texts were, and so we are really becoming like Pakistan has been, and as I said, we're becoming like Europe. I mean, see, this is what I'm saying was the damage. So when Gandhi said, we've never had that damage, so why should we talk about secularism? It's just slavish mimicry of the West, of Europe. Right. That is right. Then the very same reason why he wasn't a secularist is a reason to be a secularist now, because we are now mimicking Europe. So Gandhi himself, for the very reason that he didn't say much about secularism, would have been totally committed to it now.
So the objective conditions of present day India are completely different from what Gandhi was seeing.
Exactly. And we are now, Gandhi explicitly denied that European nationalism was, that's what he was talking about by unself-conscious pluralism. He said, we haven't gone that way. So what is the secularism? It's irrelevant. But if we are going that way, then it's immediately relevant. By his lights, it would be relevant if he were alive today, I think.
Right. So one final question before we close this interview, sir. There was a judgment in which two student activists, Umar, Khalid and Sharjeel Imam, they were denied bail for their alleged role in the Delhi riots of 2020. Now, of course, this has drawn various sort of reactions. Some people have condemned it and said, this is they deserve to get bail and stuff like that. In fact, 5 of their associates did get bail, whereas some other persons have expressed their support for the Supreme Court's judgment by stating that anti-terror activities have to be dealt with this way. So, as you were saying, we are seeing an increasingly polarizing atmosphere. But how do you look at this particular
Well,
instance?
you have to define terrorism.
Yeah.
What is terrorism? I mean, is the lynching of Muslims terrorism?
Should be.
So compare that to what Umar Khalid did. What is the comparison? So you can bend words in any way you like, and anti-national. I mean, that's what these people are called, right? Anti-national. I mean, which country talks of anti-national? America did during the McCarthyite period. Well, that's what's happening with universities and all now. This, but can you imagine somebody in Stockholm saying of somebody, who's criticizing the government, you're anti-national? Right. I mean, it just doesn't happen unless you've really gone completely authoritarian in the way that McCarthyite was. And the universities, and of course under Trump, the universities, higher education is suffering there, and it's not exactly the same way, but similar, in some ways, similar ways. And I think it's a very important thing for people in the media and so on to fight for the freedom of information, of opinion, and because you see, basically, unless you have some agencies which can call corruption, and you've removed a level of people's sovereignty. You see, UPA2 fell because people were able to call corruption. And the media publicized it. When the Satyam and so on, there were investigative agencies which established, which were working to establish. All those have been taken over. There's no place where you can call corruption. This government is as corrupt as UPA2, if not more, and there is no one who can call it, whereas you could call it then. So I put it to you, there was a famous, rather creepy political theorist called Carl Schmitt, who said, those who can call the exception, they have the real sovereignty. So emergencies as an exception, etc. And so I put it to you that those who can call corruption have a sort of level of people's sovereignty. The media, higher education, where Umar Khalid was able to express his opinion, but also all these other agencies where you can investigate wrongdoing and so on and so forth. All these things have been silenced.
Right.
Or been taken over, and you can't. And so if you can't call corruption, there's a real sense of people's sovereignty that is being eliminated.
Okay. So on that note, I would want to conclude this interview. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you, sir. Thank you so much.